Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalava Girivardhari Gopi Jannavalava Girivardhari Yasodhanandana The reading from the sixth canto, second canto, chapter 6, text number 31. The chapter is entitled Purusha Shukta Confirmed. I'll say, you guys repeat. Narayane Bhagavati Taridam Vishvamahitam Grihitamayuru Gunaha Sargadav Agunahaspata Narayane Bhagavati Taridam Vishvamahitam Grihitamayuru Guna Sargadav Agunahaspata. Narayane Bhagavati Taridam Vishvamahitam Grihitamayuru Gunaha Sargadav Agunasvataha. Narayane Bhagavati Taridam Vishvamahitam Grihitamayuru Guna Sargadav Agunasvataha. Narayane Bhagavati Taridam Vishvamahitam Grihitam Mayuruguna Sargadava Gunahasvataha. Narayane Bhagavati Taridam Vishwamahitam Grihitam Mayurugunaha Sargadava Gunahasvata. Narayane unto Narayan Bhagavati, the personality of Godhead. Tat idam, all these material manifestations. Vishvam, all the universes. Ahitam, situated. Grihita, having accepted. Maya, material energies. Uru Gunaha, greatly powerful. Sarga Adau, in creation, maintenance, and destruction. Agunaha, without affinity for the material modes. Svataha, self-sufficiently. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhakta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Ki Jai. All the material manifestations of the universes are therefore situated in His powerful material energies, which He accepts self-sufficiently, although He is eternally without affinity for the material modes. Purport. The question put by Narada before Brahma concerning the sustenance of the material creation is thus answered. Material actions and reactions, as the material scientists can superficially observe, are not basically ultimate truth in regard to creation, maintenance, and destruction. The material energy is a potency of the Lord which is displayed in time, except in the three qualities of goodness, passion, and ignorance, in the forms of Vishnu, Brahma, and Shiva. The material energy thus works under the supreme spell of His Lordship, although He is always transcendental to all such material activities. A rich man constructs a big house by spending his energy in the shape of resources, and similarly he destroys a big house by his resources. But the maintenance is always under his personal care. The Lord is the richest of the rich, because He is always fully complete in 6 opulences. Therefore He is not required to do anything personally, but everything in the material world is carried out by His wishes and direction. Therefore, the entire material manifestation is situated in Narayan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The impersonal conception of the Supreme Truth is due to lack of knowledge only, and this fact is clearly explained by Brahmaji, who is supposed to be the creator of the universal affairs. Brahmaji is the highest authority in Vedic wisdom, and his assertion in this connection is therefore the supreme information. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Chalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakopatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. First, I of course would like to beg the blessings of all the Vaishnavas here. I'm by far the junior most, I think, in the whole temple actually. So as such, I have no qualification to be sitting here, but as per the request of the Vaishnavas, here I am, trying to speak something in line with Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So I beg all of your wishes that I may do just that. So it's an interesting verse. I'll just repeat it again. All the material manifestations of the universe are therefore situated in his powerful material energies, which he accepts self-sufficiently, although he is eternally without affinity for the material modes. So it's kind of relief. Like the first thing I got out of this was that Krishna is in control, which is a good thing to know, because there's a lot of craziness going on now in the world and also in the temple. So it's a relief to know that regardless of whatever's going on around us, ultimately Krishna is in control. And of course, the more we understand that, then the more we can have inner peace. And the fact that people don't understand that nowadays is the reason why there's so much turmoil in Kali Yuga. It's getting crazier and crazier because people are progressively becoming more removed from this idea of God being in control. They think they're in control, which isn't working out so well. So we have the verse, Bhoktaram Yagya-tapasam, Sarvalokam Maheshwaram, Suhridam Sarvabhutanam, Gatvamam Shantam Richati, which means the one who knows Krishna as the supreme controller of everything, planets and demigods, as the supreme enjoyer of all sacrifices, austerities, penances, and as the well-wishing friend of everybody, attains peace from the pangs of material miseries. And we could see nowadays the fact that people are just not accepting these three facts is directly correlating to the chaos you see in the world. For example, people are thinking that they're in control, that everybody is in control of their own destiny. And so it's something like this Black Lives Matter movement. It's a very much, there's a very strong rift between one side and the other side, because both of them are of this complete faith that it's this person's fault or it's that person's fault. And they're not understanding that ultimately everything is a result of people's previous activities, their karma, and also Krishna's will. And so the more that people are being removed from this idea, the more we're seeing separation. And then as a result of that, there's lots of fighting and chaos, turmoil. People just aren't getting along. Secondly, this idea that Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, it's like why nobody's happy nowadays, because they're all trying to enjoy separately from Krishna. And it's been compared to the hand trying to enjoy without feeding the body. It's like you can mush food all you want in your hand, but all you're going to get is some sensory stimulation, which is exactly what everybody else is getting by trying to just enjoy themselves. You're just getting this sensory stimulation. It's not actually satisfying. It just kind of absorbs your mind for a short period of time, and then you need to do it again soon, and even then there's really never any happiness from the beginning to end. It's just this sensory stimulation. And in that connection, it's interesting to see how it relates to this idea of the tree, the material universe being a tree reflected on water, because it's a fact we can see things that have a real source. But when we try to interact with them without acknowledging the source, then all we're doing is just getting sensory stimulation, right? We're just touching the water. And so by touching the water, we're not actually touching the real thing. We're not actually experiencing the real thing that we think we're experiencing. We're just getting some sensory stimulation, and we're calling that happiness, or we're calling that enjoyment of the thing that we think that we're enjoying. When in reality, it's all an illusion, you know. Not that the thing itself is an illusion, but our perception of it as the all in all, whereas something that's meant just for my sensory stimulation is not working out so well. And of course, one of my favorite points in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is the well-wishing friend of everybody. And so again, you can relate that to the Black Lives Matter movement. It's like, but it's a revolutionary concept that like someone could die, someone could be killed. But that's Krishna's way of being friendly to him. It requires some intelligence and some deeper understanding of what is the nature of God and what is the nature of the material world. And so the nature of God, he's saying here, he's your best friend. And the nature of the material world is it's extremely temporary, and it's meant for ultimate rectification. But as long as people are thinking that it's just for sensory stimulation, for touching the water, then there could be no happiness, there could be no peace. So it's a relief to know this, that Krishna is the supreme controller, everything's going on under his will, and he's the supreme enjoyer. But it can be difficult sometimes to actually put that into practice, that okay, like everything that happens to me or the people around me is simply Krishna's loving will. So how can we understand that? Well, Krishna says, or Lord Chaitanya says, Asishiva parvatam punashtamam adarshanam armatam karotiva. That especially for the devotees, Krishna sometimes handles us roughly by his embrace, which is also a very kind of revolutionary concept to people in general and even to other spiritualists, Christians and so on. This idea that God may handle you roughly by your embrace. It's not that if he's pleased with you, he'll automatically give you a car and a bunch of money, you know. But people don't like to accept that, and so they're depressed because they think God hates them or they think they're not doing enough. But the fact is that it's a little more intricate than what meets the eye, and that it's not just so black and white. That oftentimes we see throughout the whole Bhagavatam, Krishna's dearest devotees go through like the toughest stuff. You know, the Pandavas, Bali Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, so many examples. But then it can be difficult in real time when our car breaks down, or you know, we get slammed with some random taxation or insurance thing. That actually this is Krishna's loving hand, you know, in my life. But of course, and this is something I like to bring up on book distribution law because it's so universally acceptable, that the times in our lives, if you think about it, when we make the most progress, when we make the most headway in terms of understanding ourselves and the world around us, aren't necessarily the times when everything's going right. It's the times when everything's going wrong, typically, that we're forced into this state of self-reflection and serious inquiry about life and how to actually make the most of our time here. So this is a subtle point that we don't see really brought up too much in the world or even in other spiritual paths. But the more we understand this, that ultimately Krishna is in control, and even the negative things, so-called negative things that happen to us, are his divine will, and the more we can be peaceful, and ultimately the much more deeper our relationship with Krishna can become. Because it's no longer just an order supplier, you know, you make me feel good, I make you feel good. It's no matter what, right? Even if you handle me roughly by your embrace, or you make me brokenhearted by not being present before me. It's a revolutionary concept also, this idea that even if God apparently neglects me, or makes me feel like I've been rejected, or makes me feel lonely, but still that's his loving embrace in one way or another. And how else could we become purified? How else could our love be tested? How else could our sincerity be augmented without this rough handling by the embrace? You know, it's a kind of sweet relationship that then is forged when the devotee doesn't care what happens to him. You can see with Prabhupada, he was like gorged by a bull, he was living in abject poverty in the Bowery, and he was like attacked by some crazy guy on acid, and still he just went on with his service, saying, you know, what can be done? I'm just here trying to serve Lord Chaitanya. And you could tell that that's where the real nectar lies, you know, in this mood, this consciousness of I don't care anymore what happens to me. You could put me in a penthouse, you could put me on the street, you could kick me out of this place, you know, you could make it so like Prabhupada didn't have much food to eat on a day-to-day basis. Seems like the preaching's not working. what can I do? I'm just going to carry out the order of my spiritual master regardless. And that's where the good stuff lies. In fact, that's corroborated by 10.14.8, which is Tate nukampam susamiksamano ugyana evatma kritam vipakam hridvagbapur bir vidadan namaste jivityo mukti padesa daiva. This means one who earnestly awaits for you to bestow your causeless mercy upon him, all the while patiently suffering the reactions of his past misdeeds and offering you obeisances with body, mind, and heart, is certainly eligible for liberation, for it has become his rightful claim. Again, it's a very sweet kind of relationship that's there, and we're just in this state of whatever happens. I'm just going to continue on in a humble mood, thanking you for this opportunity to become humble and tolerant, and to purify my consciousness, purify my desire to simply be with you, to simply serve you, regardless of whatever my position is otherwise. But still, it can feel sometimes on a day-to-day basis, it's like, well, why? I don't understand this. Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to this devotee? I just can't understand how this is meant to help me, or how this is Krishna's loving embrace in some way. But there's a really wonderful purport to that verse written by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada that I'll just read from really quickly, because it really captures the whole why aspect, which can be tough to understand. The word susamikshamana indicates that a devotee earnestly awaits the mercy of the Supreme Lord, even while suffering the painful effects of previous sinful activities. Lord Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that a devotee who fully surrenders unto him is no longer liable to suffer the reactions of his previous karma. However, because in his mind a devotee may still maintain the remnants of his previous sinful mentality, the Lord removes the last vestiges of the enjoying spirit by giving his devotee punishments that may sometimes resemble sinful reactions. The purpose of the entire creation of God is to rectify the living entity's tendency to enjoy without the Lord. And therefore, the particular punishment given for a sinful activity is specifically designed to curtail the mentality that produced the activity. Although a devotee has surrendered to the Lord's devotional service, until he is completely perfect in Krishna consciousness, he may maintain a slight inclination to enjoy the false happiness of this world. The Lord therefore creates a particular situation to eradicate this remaining enjoying spirit. This unhappiness suffered by a sincere devotee is not technically a karmic reaction. It is rather the Lord's special mercy for inducing his devotee to completely let go of the material world and return home back to Godhead. A sincere devotee earnestly desires to go back to the Lord's abode. Therefore, he willingly accepts the Lord's merciful punishment and continues offering respects and obeisances to the Lord with his heart, words, and body. Such a bona fide servant of the Lord, considering all hardships a small price to pay for gaining the personal association of the Lord, certainly becomes a legitimate son of God, as indicated here by the words Dayabhak. Just as one cannot approach the sun without becoming fire, one cannot approach the Supreme Pure, Lord Krishna, without undergoing a rigid purificatory process, which may appear like suffering, but which is in fact a curative treatment administered by the personal hand of the Lord. It's like also what more intense, I'm sure there is, but it just reminded me of Bharat Maharaj. He was on this super exalted level. He was in samadhi, crying, just tears, just explain, were just flowing from his eyes while he's meditating on Vishnu. And it didn't work out. He wound up becoming a deer, which is like, what? How do you go from that to becoming a deer? It's like, you really don't hear about that. But I found it's like in these intricate notes you find in the Bhagavatam or in the philosophy that you could really get the deepest realizations. And actually, in that section of the Bhagavatam, it's said that this was due to his past misdeeds. This was due to his karmic reactions. But then in the purport, then Srila Prabhupada is actually the fact is that he was on a certain level where he was past karmic reactions. So then how to reconcile? And then that's where this verse comes in, that something like that would appear to be a karmic reaction, but in reality it was Krishna's mercy to put him in a situation that was especially designed for him, so that his last vestiges of the enjoying spirit could be eradicated. And then of course he becomes Jadbar, and then the vestiges are gone. He's not trying to talk to anybody. He's not trying to do anything Brahminical. In fact, he's doing the opposite of Brahminical activities. And he's just ecstatic in love of God. He's just going around in samadhi, and eventually preaches to the king, liberates the king. And so it's a very interesting concept that oftentimes Krishna's most dear devotees and devotees who are most advanced end up going through the most intense suffering at one point or another. But ultimately it's Krishna just kind of bringing them closer, literally embracing them. So I'll ask if there's any reflections now. Yes.
Like when you were talking about, the whole class was nice, but thanks for reading that purport. I appreciated that, and elaborating on it a little bit, because I always wondered that, devotional service, will surely give one the human form of life, or at least that's what Srila Prabhupada said quite a few times. But then I wondered, well, Bart Maharaj was basically, he was like a pure devotee on the level of Bhava, but he didn't go back to Godhead with the speaker, going back to Godhead, he didn't get a human form. He became a deer in his next life. So I always tried to kind of like reconcile those two statements or those two ideas, but I think the way you explained it was really nice. Was that it was like Krishna specifically giving him what he needed. And he had just a little bit traces of contamination still left in his heart. And to become a deer, and then Jadbar in his next life was going to eradicate whatever obstacle was there, so he wouldn't go back to God. So thanks for explaining that.
Yeah, and like imagine like put yourself in Jadbar's shoes. It's like you remember you were just a deer in your past life. And you're like, what? I can't do anything now. I mean, he was still doing yoga.
You go to the classes or whatever.
Yeah. So you could do something, but he was like, I was so advanced in my previous life. Obviously, he wasn't thinking in a materialistic way. But he was like, on this super high level, and then I became attached to a deer, and I became a deer. I could see, like, if I remember my past life, if I was like some like animal, I feel like I'd be a lot more serious in this life. Also, because one of the biggest things in Krishna consciousness is faith, right? It's like the more faith you have in the holy name, or in Krishna being the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the more powerful your sadhana will be, and your ultimate experience of Krishna consciousness. It's the whole thing. To hear submissively. That's key. It's one really nice verse. Shrunile Kuribe Chittiraginari Dosh Krishna Gata Preme Habi Paibe Santosh Adi Lila 1107, where Krishnadas Kaviraj Maharaj says, simply hearing submissively will free one's heart from all faults of ignorance, and thus one will develop deep love for Krishna. This is the path of peace. But like, how can you hear submissively if you don't have complete faith? Otherwise, there's always going to be some mental hook. It's going to say, oh, what about that? Or what if this doesn't really, I don't see that. But if you were a deer in your past life and you remember the previous position you were in, and you see like, oh yeah, like this is real, or reincarnation thing, and like what I was practicing, it's clearly Krishna's mercy here for me. And it's like, you're just going to have total absorption, total faith in Krishna and Krishna consciousness. And so you could see how something, again, it's this whole material world, we deal with duality, but on the absolute plane for devotees and for Krishna, there's no duality. And so something like this, where it's apparently like the most egregious, like negative reaction you could suffer, just becoming an animal, is actually the highest benediction, or at least, practically speaking, that now he had complete faith and conviction that he was meant to just practice Krishna consciousness with full absorption, to the point where he didn't care if people were calling him names and, defecating on him, stuff. He was just like, I don't care, so I'm just going to do my thing.
That made me think of like in Vrindavan, you become an animal if you make some offenses to different artists, and then after that you go back to Godhead. And I was thinking like when you want to purify something like gold, like it takes a lot of heat, and so that's not. And so similarly, we want to become like gold, like we want to purify our consciousness. The consciousness of the people in Vrindavan is like pure gold, whereas like in the material world it's like rusty, disgusting iron.
Mm.
So to get that purification, it requires something. And I was thinking of devotees who had a hard time, and specifically I was just hearing like an overview of the Bhagavatam, and they were talking about Chitraketu Maharaj, and he became Vrikashura.
Mm.
So Chitraketu ended up going and becoming the king of the Vidyadhara planets, and he would go and enjoy with all of the Vidyadhara ladies on the airplane, and how they would enjoy was that they were singing the glories of the Lord.
Mm.
So it's like, it seems kind of nice, but then his worshipful Lord noticed that this is not going to be the quickest way that he's going to get completely purified.
Mm.
Like he may get attached to the material enjoyment aspect. So then it was arranged that he made that, it wasn't really an offense, but Goddess Parvati took it as an offense and cursed him to become a demon. And then he became like, a really, really terrible demon that in his fight, that all his soldiers left, and he knew it was guaranteed that he would be killed by Indra. And even if he could defeat Indra, he would have no one to share anything that he won with.
Mm.
Like so no one was on his side. But still, he did his duty to do it. And I'm just thinking that's like a really intense kind of suffering situation that ultimately purified him and helped him go back to Godhead sooner.
Mm. Yeah, it's like a weird thing, right? Even like after you hear so much, still like my mind is like, oh well, like why did that devotee have to go through that, or why did this have to happen? Like, shouldn't Krishna like? But I have to keep reminding myself that no, this is actually, it's an absolute situation. It's all Krishna's mercy. Like even in like the way a lot of like really exalted devotees left the world, like Prabhupada was apparently like in serious pain, to the point where the doctor was like, people usually can't handle this amount of pain. When his bones were like straight on the skin and stuff like that. Or Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, how he was like in ridiculous amounts of pain. Yeah, it reminds me of this story that Raghunath Maharaj tells about when he was spending time with Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj as he was leaving his body, and he was in just excruciating pain, and he was really feeling it, and Maharaj could tell. And so we just kind of took his hand, and he was like, let's chant together, let's chant the whole names together. And so at first he was like really struggling, he could barely do it, but then as he continued and he was able to start pronouncing the mantras and finally like actually chanting, and his tears just started streaming down his eyes, he was crying. And then he looked at Maharaj with this great smile and he said, it doesn't get any better than this. And so again, it's like the whole duality thing in the material world. It's so easy for myself to slip into that consciousness, forgetting the absolute nature of Krishna consciousness. That actually everything is Krishna's will, as it's being explained in this verse. It's all going on under his desire, by his wish, and his wish is perfect. And it's a relief to know that not only is he the supreme controller in this way, but he's also the supreme friend, So, I mean, my Guru Maharaj often says, like, if he was the supreme controller, but he wasn't your supreme friend, then you'd be in some trouble, right? It's like, who knows what's going to happen next? And if he was your supreme friend, but he wasn't the supreme controller, then it's like, what could he do, It's nice, it's great. But the fact is that he's the supreme controller and he's your best friend. And so we're in a pretty good situation here in the temple with the devotees. cultivating this friendship with Krishna. Yeah.
Can I share one more thing? There was one Indian body Mataji, she's a disciple of Bhakta, and there's a whole article online. I read this a couple of years ago, but she remembers her past life.
Hmm.
And she was an American body brahmachari who was very close to Tribhuvanatha Prabhu. And she remembered her past life ever since she was a child. And the facts, she would say things that would correlate with different facts. And even her Guru Maharaj did like a whole study of her memories, and then went back and studied this old brahmachari's life, and all the memories correlated. And she even remembers that when she was the brahmachari, he had a crush on an Indian body brahmacharini in the temple. And then I think he got in a car accident.
Oh my God.
They left his body, and then he became an Indian body brahmachari. And then she took initiation of Bhakti True Swami. And then in that article, she was saying that now this is my last life, I'm not going to make that mistake again.
Anybody else?
So, I have two reflections. I was just thinking about what Nathan said. I was just kind of thinking that, well, we're going through sufferings, and it seems like it's not a big difference whether you're in the material world. Like it's not. There is not like a choice. We don't have a choice. We still have to suffer, whether you're in Krishna consciousness or whether you're in the material world. That's why it doesn't make any sense to escape, just kind of accept suffering. But at least, you're under the guidance of the Lord. And I was just thinking that anyway, and another one, when you were saying about that the Krishna is the supreme enjoyer, and that how we're not supreme enjoyers, and that we just try to satisfy our senses. I was thinking about these two conceptions, shreyas and prayers. When we try to get something just right now, basically just to satisfy the senses. Because if you see on the long run, it might be something different. And it's nice to remember that Krishna is our friend. And he's always our well-wisher. So don't try to satisfy our senses. It's a good reminder for myself. Because, sometimes we get agitated by something, by someone. But as long as you don't react on that, Krishna will kind of show you the way how to deal with it.
Yeah, it's like how else could we actually become humble unless we're put in situations where we can actually practice humility, It's like interesting concept of Krishna consciousness also, that it's not necessarily a magic wand that we're praying, we're chanting, we're reading Bhagavatam, we're performing devotional service, and then one day Krishna will just be like, hit us in the head and then we're pure devotees, It's actually this kind of grueling in one sense, but blissful in another sense, but this process of anartha-nivritti, What is that anartha-nivritti? It's just like everyday battle, where we're being confronted with these things that are undesirable. And Prabhupada gives the example of the horse, someone's riding a crazy horse and he doesn't care where he goes, he's just kind of floating around like the average karmi, then there's no problem. You're just kind of going here and there, and whatever you see, whatever comes up in your heart or whatever, it's really, you barely notice it. But for someone who's actually has a destination, then to hop on a crazy horse is like so stressful. It's like so anxiety, and that's the mind, is like this crazy horse where it's just constantly here and there, the senses are just flying around. And so it's a matter of breaking that horse, this wild horse that's for millions and millions of lifetimes practically is just being able to let run free. Now we're in this position where we're trying to break that horse, somehow or other. It's like, it's a seemingly impossible task. But of course, by the grace of Lord Chaitanya, then one can achieve ultimate perfection in this very life. It's mentioned all throughout the CC, in this very life, this phrase. And one can achieve ultimate perfection. And of course it comes through the mercy of the bona fide spiritual master. And so then many people have bona fide spiritual master by the grace of Srila Prabhupada, but then it's a matter of how do we take advantage of that? And ultimately by our own endeavor we can't really do much because we're so tiny. What we can do is adjust our consciousness. And it's said all over the scriptures, second verse of Bhagavatam, you have to submissive, attentive, service attitude. The verse I quoted earlier, hear submissively. And so we could see that, in one sense, the quality of our practice, of our sadhana, is directly dependent on our consciousness. And we see the highest consciousness is this attitude of submissive service. Because otherwise we just don't really have that much control, per se. It's like, that's why you see some people will go and chant 64 rounds a day, and they'll perform these intense austerities, and they'll wind up not making much more advancement than someone who's just in a humble service attitude and carrying out the order of a spiritual master. And so in that regard also, there's a really nice verse, which you all know, I'm sure, which is Machasparshastu Kanteya Satoshna Sukadukada Agama Paino Nityas Tam Satik Shastra Bharata. Which means happiness and distress come and go, winter and summer seasons, they're non-permanent. And they disappear in due course. But one should continue on without being disturbed. And His Grace Adipurush Prabhu, who made me memorize that verse, said, well, what's not disturbed? And he said, it's your service. Your service isn't disturbed. And my Guru Maharaj often says, your seva will save you, which is such a fact. We see that, I mean, in my short time in Krishna consciousness, but anybody could see these really much older senior devotees who stayed around, right? And Prabhupada said we shouldn't be surprised at those who would leave. We should be surprised at those who stay. And we see the ones who stayed around weren't the ones who were the big names necessarily back in the day. Of course, some of them are still here. But most of the time, we see the ones who were able to stick it out for 4 decades of 4 regular principles and chanting Hare Krishna 16 rounds are the ones who had some seva, had some service that they just kind of grabbed onto and they just kind of wrote it out regardless of what was going on. Because again, it's not that we take Krishna consciousness and then things just get easy and we can just coast through life and chant Hare Krishna and do the 4 regs and no problem. No, this is the material world. It's Kali Yuga. It's not Satya Yuga anymore. It's like every day something's going to happen for the most part. It's going to be a bumpy ride generally. But if we have our service, then we can just kind of hold on tight and just let it pull us. And then because we're carrying out the order, desire of our spiritual master, then we'll be protected. And we can ride back home, back to Godhead. So yeah, it reminds me of this story that Radhanath Maharaj tells also, where he's saying this is relatively recently, a few years back, he was mentioning how when I was in New Vrindavan, I was just digging holes. And yeah, I heard like they were building some fence or something, and he said, day after day, I would just be in the field, digging holes. Sometimes it would be muddy, and the holes would get filled up, and it was such, And now I'm giving lectures in front of thousands of people, to big CEOs and controllers of large portions of the economy and stuff like that. But in my eyes, I'm just digging holes still, just doing my service. This is my service, regardless of where Krishna wants to put me. And so we could see that if we have that attitude, that sincere surrender, submissive service, regardless of whether I'm known as some guy who does this, or I get recognition, or I have some grand service, or I have some small service, I feel like this attitude of, whether I'm cleaning garbage bins or I'm giving lectures in front of thousands of people, just let me maintain this attitude of sincere, submissive service to you without any perverse, ulterior motive. And then that's kind of like the mercy zone. It's like the mercy pocket. If you could stay in that zone there, then you'll be protected a lot more, because then the things that happen to you, well, one, of course, you'll be carrying out some service to your spiritual master, and two, these things that happen throughout the day or throughout a lifetime that would normally deter someone who isn't so sober won't affect you as much. And so you have a much smoother ride back on back to God. Is there anything else?
Really quickly. So it's just an experience I had yesterday.
Can you speak a little louder?
Cool experience I had yesterday, which directly reminded me of something Vishnu last Swami said when the devotee asked him. The devotee asked like, "Are you always busy doing something?" And he said, "Yeah, you have to leave no gaps for me."
Mm.
And then I was experiencing yesterday, we were like changing the kirtans, and the middle was just one of the was just coming, and the devotee like didn't want to leave, and I was like, please leave me, like, no, please leave me. And it was probably like 3 or 4 minutes, and then eventually he left the rhythm and stuff. But during that time, it was really interesting because in the break between the holy name and chant, I could start feeling the influence of the moon's coming in and out.
Yeah.
Like there's a golden bubble and you just start feeling it seeping in. So yeah, how important it is and always be engaged with transcendental vibration.
Mm. Yeah. My spiritual master is also big on this fill the gaps idea. And that's why he does the whole chapter a day thing. He tries to push that because there's these gaps, like you're about to go in the car with somebody and they're like, oh, I just forgot something, I gotta run in real quick and get this. It'd be 2 minutes, and then of course it's usually more like 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then in that span of time, you could easily chant a chapter or even 2 of Bhagavad Gita. But yeah, it's definitely a fact that Maya looks for every opportunity to kind of slide in there and break your concentration. But as long as we have something ready to fill the gap, then we're in the safe zone still.
Question. So you're talking about the mercy zone where we continue with our service and like try to stay in like a normal mood, but what would be your advice to devotees, or what's like a key thing? And then my Guru Maharaj has answered that. Like people ask him a question like that all the time. I ask you first.
A key thing to like stay in that bubble?
Like a tip or trick, a secret.
Tip or trick? Yeah. I mean, the first thing is always like, you gotta try and break something when you're chanting Hare Krishna. And I mean, I can only speak from my personal realization and what I've heard. But for me, in terms of my own pratyaksha, I found that whenever I chant really good rounds in the morning, then everything else becomes a lot easier. Staying in that consciousness. Because I think it was Chandrasekhar Maharaj who was here giving class maybe last month or something. He was saying like, I found that if I can win that battle in the morning with my japa in my mind, like staying attentive while I'm chanting, then all the other battles throughout the day become much easier to win. That and everything that comes to mind is just to have kind of certain mantras that you try and remember, like I live to be corrected, or I often like to just sometimes remember to try and think like, that just like whenever I'm put in a situation that may be disturbing or may otherwise bother me, I just try and think like, thank you Krishna for giving me this opportunity to become humble and tolerant. And then I found that the more that I practice that, then the more it becomes like an automatic response, when something happens like that. And then in that way, but even that, it's like for my mind to like remember to think that, I think it requires me to chant good rounds in the morning, But what does your Guru Maharaj say?
His secret is that he says that he always feels indebted to Prabhupada. So if we always feel master, then going through austerities and hardships in our service, it like becomes much like it's not as hard. It's like your mind's gonna be like, oh, I have to do that. You know, how can I? You know, not otherwise the mind. There's so many things. The mind's like, well, I don't have to do that and that. And I maybe
Right.
budget a little bit on that one or whatever. And Maya seeps in and all the all these gaps. But he's always so intense in his service, so people are always asking him like, what? Why do you keep going? What do you keep doing? And so that's he said, I feel so indebted. You know, Prabhupada saved me. If I think about where I would be without him, then I just shudder at the thought. I'm so grateful for everything he gave. And so we just, think of like anything that we've gotten from our spiritual master, then that's what he says, that's the secret.
Wow. Yeah, it reminds me of this one time I was on Govardhan Parikram with His Grace Bhakta Prabhu, Prabhupada disciple, Sankirtan, many, many years all over the world. And it was just him and I, like super early in the morning, going along the mark. And then as we're walking, just chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, then there's this pig that starts walking towards us. And then and we're just like in the zone, it's like quiet, like Rama Muhurta, we're just chilling, okay? And right as he gets close to us, and he goes, "Thank you, Prabhupada." He just yells at this pig, "Thank you, Prabhupada." And I'm like, what was that? And he was like, that could have been me. He said that could have been me, but Prabhupada saved me like that. So you could see that, there's a connection there. These advanced devotees. And of course, when you're tasting something from Krishna consciousness, then it's much easier to feel this indebtedness and this gratitude. So you can see these advanced devotees who are really experiencing Krishna's name have, of course, this deep gratitude. It's like, it's a nice proof, that it's there, that it's real.
And I wanted to add also, Abu Ramam says that, if you want to make, to go through difficulties or to make progress, you have to celebrate small victories. Because if you have a big goal, or big austerity to perform, right? If you think in a big scale, it's very overwhelming. But if you celebrate every small victory, for example, like yesterday, I went to the distribution after such a long time, like 2 weeks. So it's a long time being all the time on the phone. And just you interact with the people. Of course, I think like, oh yes, come on, I'm just distributing books, all the time. It's easy. But then yesterday I couldn't, it was really hard to distribute, to even stop people. And I became a little bit discouraged. But then I remembered this thing. And even one book, at least even if you can stop one person, it's worth all the endeavor. And then you can keep going like that. So we need to really be grateful to ourselves that we're going through all these austerities for Srila Prabhupada and for our spiritual masters. And in small quantities. I found it really practical, helpful.
Yeah. Sometimes it can feel overwhelming. We're going up against the material energy, and we're so tiny and insignificant, but to be connected to Srila Prabhupada and to remember that even a little bit of service is so pleasing to Srila Prabhupada, if we could at least do something every day, then it definitely connects us. And I was also just reminded, I think it was Vipra Brahmana or something in Gorlila, who was a householder, and he wanted to go with Lord Chaitanya, but then Lord Chaitanya said, no, stay here with your family. And he said, well, how will I remember you? How can I stay in this consciousness of you? And Mahaprabhu told him, just tell everyone you meet about Krishna, and then you'll be protected. So it's nice, It's easier said than done. You're at the counter and you're checking out and stuff. Hey, do you know about Krishna? But, if you can imbibe that to a degree, as much as you're able, then according to Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then we'll also be protected in that way too.
I really appreciate the point about what you said about Yakama saying that thinking about Krishna is just your friend, and then also just thinking about not to control how both you do, but actually thinking of both. And it reminds me of I remember when I first started Krishna consciousness, how I was like, oh my God, there's people that were born with this. Oh my God, they're so fortunate. Da da da. I was like, man, I really got the bad end of the stick as far as birth is concerned. But actually, Krishna put me in a perfect situation. And And actually, because he's all good, everything that he does is all good, whether he kills you or lets you live, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I'm listening to everyone speak today, I'm thinking about how actually it's not only did he put me in that family to eat meat and all these other things for as chastisement so I can come to like be able to compare devotional service to that and relish this way more, but also so my family can actually see me that transform in that state. So it's like you put me in that situation because of my past life's activities, but also and to prepare me for this life's activities that I've chosen, but also to allow my family to gain some piety in watching me do it. And I've actually like seen it, and you know, often they talk about how like you can, by practicing devotional service, you know, 7 generations up and 7 generations down. It's like interesting. I was thinking that I would have to watch that and experience that like after I'm gone or something, but actually the mercy is available all the time. It's just whether or not we're gonna what we choose to do with it. I mean, Devangi, she's out there trying to give people mercy all the time. But people are like, no, thank you, I'm good, you know. And it's like it's really instead of being in that false ego victim mentality, taking it and putting it into instead of victim mentality, changing it into accountability. Accountable for like I'm accountable for my past life's deeds, like all of them. And so they're just like if you have a debt, you have to repay it, you know, like if you have a student loan or something, you have to do some work to get some Lakshmi to like rectify that situation. So in the same way, you can see that in our devotional lives, like yeah, they're suffering, but it's difference between involuntary suffering and choosing the suffering. It reminds me of the prayer in Christianity. God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change and the courage to change things that I can. And it's just like Bhakti Yoga is changing the courage to change things that we can. Like, yeah, there's still devotees that get cancer, there's devotees that die from COVID. It's like, but it's different because the result is trying to attain pleasure to Krishna, opposed to just like being willy-nilly and whimsical in the world. It's different, but it looks the same.
Yeah, that nice point. I was appreciating also you were saying in the beginning how, you know, it was kind of baffling you're born in this like family that, you know, the meat eaters and stuff like that, which I think maybe we all were, right? I don't think we're all born in non-devotee families. In that regard, it's nice to remember that this is Lord Chaitanya's Sankirtan movement, right? And so he wants everybody to get praying, you know, not just the people who are like practicing Brahminical culture or like very austere, but like Jagai and Madai, right? Like anybody. He wants to make sure everybody gets love of Godhead. And so it's nice to remember that sometimes, especially when we're out trying to distribute it. We're all Sankirtan devotees here, you know, like sometimes it could feel overwhelming. It's like, what am I doing here? But then you remember, oh yeah, I'm a servant of Lord Chaitanya, and I'm here carrying out his mission, you know, to give love of Godhead to the most fallen, to in fact, to everybody possible. So, it's time for Prashadam. Thank you all for coming out. And Grantra Śhrīmad-Bhāgavatam ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki jai.